So
Hey, what's up, Kyle? How you doing, bro?
Then you'll proceed off. They said there may be another picture here in this mark, and then you'll proceed off stage and go back to your seat. At the end, there'll be a prompt to take a group photo. Most likely they're not. And what about this now?
Stand by. Watch that.
And then there'll be a group photo.
I can speak here. I believe there will be a cadet here. Don't touch the mic. They told us when it's calibrated. And I'll just kind of like be behind you.
Okay.
I salute behind you, and then we walk off and grab back our seats.
oval at everybody else's ones.
Thank you.
That's cool.
Yep, that's pushable.
There's usually drop it in on the stand right here. Okay. We'll walk off this way and back up to the seats.
How are you doing?
The ceremony
The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes. Please silence your cell phones and take your seats.
Good morning, folks. Good morning. I'm Steve Gilland. I'm your superintendent here at the United States Military Academy. And just on behalf of our leadership team that's up here, we're thankful that you're here, and we welcome you to the United States Military Academy for Green Belt, which this is a
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the West Point Association of Graduates Ring Melt Ceremony for the class of 2025. I'm Debbie Edelin, class of 1992, honorary class of 1973, and your Master of Ceremonies for this event. On behalf of the Association of Graduates Chairman, the Honorable Robert A. McDonald, class of 1975, and our President and CEO, Colonel Mark Beeger, class of 1991, it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished guests. Lieutenant General Stephen W. Gilland and his wife Betsy, both class of 1990. Command Sergeant Major Phil K. Burdo and his wife Marlene. Major General Lori L. Robinson, class of 1994. Command Sergeant Major Robert T. Craven and his wife Belle. Brigadier General Shane Rees, class of 1996. Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, class of 1975, a 50-year affiliate and the guest speaker for 500th night. The Association of Graduates would like to extend a very special welcome to our ring donors and their families who are here in person and watching on our live stream. Thank you for donating your ring or your loved one's ring. Your generosity ensures that the ring melt reflects the long gray line and fortifies the powerful connection of graduates and our beloved Academy for the next generation of leaders. We are also honored to have among us today a very special group who we hold in the highest regard and place in our hearts. Would our Gold Star families please stand? We have the Crocker family, the Fritz family, and the McMahon family. As we remember and honor your loved ones today, we recognize and thank you. Its 24th includes shared and loved ones who an everlasting Lincoln Academy and amplifies the among our key partners, Mr. Carr, especially the class of 2025, class of 20 attendance. We have 3 printed materials each aids by carefully removing Del 5, and they're going to have member Freddie McFerrin, Mr. Tom Zerla, 66 ring donors, Mrs. Ruth Crocker, whose husband, Captain David R. Crocker Jr., was killed in Vietnam on May 17th, 1969. Thank you for being here, ma'am. And Mrs. Susan Farrell and her family, who have donated her husband, Colonel Henry R. Farrell's ring. Thank you. The West Point Association of Graduates and the United States Corps of Cadets extend our profound gratitude to the class of 1966 for their generous gift endowment, ensuring that the Class Ring Memorial Program will continue in perpetuity for future generations of the Long Gray Line. This significant legacy endowment, created in memory of the fallen brothers of the class of 1966, serves to honor their service, sacrifice, and valor. We honor and remember them now.
Every one of our classmates killed in Vietnam died in their early 20s. It's sad.
It's the first time that we're going to remember these guys forever.
I believe we have a responsibility to our classmates to never forget them.
We put that memorial there so that we wouldn't forget.
The class paid a heavy price for its commitment to duty, honor, country.
We lost the largest number in Vietnam. The legacy of the class is the service to this nation.
It's important to tell their stories. They have family, they have friends. We want to make sure that they are not forgotten.
Billy Flynn was the first one to die in Vietnam 6 months after graduation.
Frank Radke. But Frank was an amazing, amazing guy.
But Fred was just a genuinely honest brother from West Point.
Richard Elmo Hood, highly motivated young man from Winter Park, Florida.
Don Judd, a great American from Alexander, New York.
We were the closest of friends, not just brothers. We were the closest of friends.
His name was Richard William Thompson. He was a tough character with a real strong personality.
Pete Lance. He was wise. He loved poetry.
Charlie Johnson, and he wanted to be a Ranger. Ranger Johnson, he was known as.
Hugh R. McKibben was smart and kind.
He was truly a hero. Frank was one of the good guys.
Robert Wayne Lucky. Bob was kind of a gentle giant. He was about 6'5".
Howie Pontuck, he was one of the best gymnasts. He was the captain of the gym team in his senior year.
Jack Burrow. He did a great job as a platoon leader in Vietnam.
He was this mild-mannered, smile on his face kind of guy, but he was a tough soldier.
Thomas J. Hayes IV. This is a guy that you'd be proud to have as President of the United States.
Pete Donnell, and he excelled in all athletics as well as academics.
John Hoskins, he was a natural leader. Looked at and you could tell this guy knows what he's doing.
Art Parker. Everybody loved him. He was a fantastic guy.
David Brown, he was a good guy.
Frank Metzer, he was a student of military history and all the military subjects.
Dave Crocker, he was always exceptionally mature, really balanced.
Al Culpepper, great guy, just a good old guy from Louisiana.
Mike Grisafi was an outstanding student. He was an outstanding athlete.
Mike Snell was just an exceptional human being. I miss him terribly.
Lou, he had no self-serving characteristics. It was all about serving others.
Doug Booth, he was really a soldier.
Gordon Kimbrell was quiet, competent, professional, dedicated. Just a good man to have.
Marty Niskanen gave their lives for this country far too young.
Art Boniface, he had this sense of really caring about the people he was with.
Selfless service is what it's all about.
People need to understand what our class did.
Each new graduate has a piece of the history of the school, the history of these people.
The ring melt involves every single cadet. It involves something that young man or young woman's going to carry for the rest of their lives.
Without our classmates, we wouldn't have made it. And if they can draw on the legacy with what they wear on their hand, that's a good thing.
Thank you, Good For You Productions and the class of 1966 for this moving tribute to your fallen brothers. We will never forget. The tradition of class rings originated at West Point in 1835, and so it's only fitting that the concept of the ring melt started here as well. The idea to melt the gold from graduates' donated rings and then incorporate that gold into the rings of the first class cadets was proposed by Lieutenant Colonel Ron Turner, class of 1958, who believed that the program would serve as a tangible connection between cadets and graduates. Starting with the bicentennial class of 2002, the long gray line has been bonded through this powerful and real way through the Association of Graduates Class Ring Memorial Program. In today's ceremony, the Association of Graduates is honored to add to the ring melt a record number of 88 rings, spanning the classes of 1913 to 2005. There are 5 families among our ring donors who have contributed more than one loved one's ring to this year's melt. The graduates who wore these 88 rings made significant contributions to our country through their distinguished military service and their lives of achievement. These graduates served our country in the Army and the Air Force, wherever they were needed around the globe, and even in space. 3 of these graduates bravely gave their fullest measure serving our country. The class of 2025 will have 9 rings from the class of 1975, their 50-year affiliate class that has been supporting them since before our day. 3 of those 50-year affiliates have also donated rings of their fathers. At this time, I would like to introduce Cadet Keely Davis, the Ring and Crest Chair for the class of 2025.
Thank you, Ms. Edlin. Good morning. We want to take this time to personally thank the class of 1966, the class of 1975, and all members, families, and friends of the classes before us who have contributed to this ceremony. The class of 2025 is honored to carry on this tradition, and we hope to see ourselves grow as stewards of our profession who tangibly carry a piece with us forever. The rings will not only remind us of our wonderful years at our rock-bound Highland home, but they will also inspire us to serve with the same dedication of valor and selfless service as the class of 1966 and the many classes before them. For the friends and families of the ring donors, it is truly an honor to be here with you today, and on behalf of the class of 2025, thank you. I would also like to thank the class of 1975 for their unending support and presence at our class events and fireside chats throughout the academic years. We have honored the class of 1975 when thoughtfully designing our class crest. We incorporated a star centrally placed in our crest and the outline of infantry blue bordering our class's Roman numeral shield, both elements derived from the class of 1975's crest. We hope to honor the classes of 1966, 1975, and all classes who have contributed to this ceremony with our future service to this nation. I want to ask my classmates in attendance today to learn from the families you are escorting and to take time at the luncheon to understand what service has meant to each family. It likely looks different for each family, but what remains the same is the values and purpose. Values ingrained in the Cadet Honor Code, Army values, and duty, honor, country. They all remain constant, but they have fueled thousands of unique stories of service to our nation. I look forward to speaking with our ring donors today, and I'm looking forward to receiving our rings this August. Thank you for the support that has made this event possible, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Cadet Davis. Your heartfelt words express well your class's appreciation to all the contributors of this special event. Before we begin the placement of rings, I would like to share some notes about the flow of this morning's ceremony. This event is being professionally photographed, videotaped, and live streamed so that attendees can enjoy the ceremony without worrying about getting that perfect shot. We're going to do it for you, and we will share the pictures and the videos on both social media and our website after the event. The placement of rings will begin with the oldest ring first and proceed in class order. The number on the card that you were given represents the order in which you will be placing the ring. Again, we'll begin with the oldest ring and continue to the newest. Please proceed to the on-deck area to the right side of the stage. When you were 5 rings away from your number, a cadet will ring the ring owner name, class year, and the name of the person who will be placing the ring into the crucible. After placing the ring into the crucible, please pause for a photo and look directly in front of you. After the photo, you may return to your seat. If you would like to offer brief remarks, please proceed to the podium before returning to your seat. At this time, will the presenters for the first 5 rings please step to the on-deck staging area? Those are the classes of 1913, 1923, 1924, 1927, and 1940. And now please welcome to the podium Cadet Catherine LaRue, the class president for the class of 2025, to begin the ring placement ceremony.
Major General Douglas T. Green, class of 1913. Placing General Green's ring into the crucible on behalf of the Green family are Michael Green, Molly Green Haywood, J.R. Haywood, and Major Lawrence Green. The Green family includes 12 West Point graduates. This is the first of 4 rings that they have donated generously for this ring melt.
My great-grandfather, Major General Douglas Green, veteran of World War I and World War II, son and son-in-law of West Pointers and father of 3 West Point graduate sons. Thank you.
Brigadier General Glenn C. Jamison, class of 1923. Placing General Jameson's ring into the crucible is Major General Lori Robinson, class of 1994. This is the first of 2 rings generously donated by the Jameson family. Colonel Harold J. Keeley, class of 1924. Placing Colonel Keeley's ring into the crucible is his grandson, James M. Keeley. This is the first of 2 rings generously donated by the Keeley family. Major General Philip D. Ginder, class of 1927. Placing General Ginder's ring into the crucible is Louise Calvert Ginder Caldwell.
If I were a politician, 10 seconds or under would be impossible. But I have this so I don't ramble. Participating in this ceremony is an honor, and I thank all who have made it possible. I'm grateful to my husband and 2 children here with me. My father is smiling. Go Army!
Colonel Francis J. Crown, class of 1940. Placing Colonel Crown's ring into the crucible are Patricia Leary, Steve Leary, and Catherine Leary Casper.
My father loved West Point. Growing up, he taught us the honor, the respect, and the love that he had, instilled it in our family. In 1948, he was assigned to come back to West Point as the post engineer. At that time, my brother and I were born, and he always said it was like home. And he had children that were born here. He said, "This is your home, this is my home." Coming back year after year, when we did, we'd walk around, we'd listen to his stories, and he would say, "It's one of my favorite places and a favorite time." This was home to him. And in the end, it is his home. It is his eternal resting place is here at West Point Cemetery. And now I find that it's very fitting that his ring is now returned home. My family and I would like to thank you and are honored to be able to donate his ring today. And I know he is going to be so proud and is proud that his ring will be part of the legacy of the Long Gray Line.
Brigadier General Lawrence V. Green, class of 1941. Placing General Green's ring into the crucible is Major Lawrence Green.
My great uncle, Brigadier General Lawrence Green, and grandfather, Brigadier General Michael Green, were brothers and classmates. They were also sons and grandsons of 2 West Point grads. Both were veterans of World War II and Vietnam. Lawrence's son, also Lawrence Green, an infantry lieutenant, was killed in action in Vietnam. Thank you.
Brigadier General Michael J. L. Green, class of 1941. Placing General Green's ring into the crucible is Major Lawrence Green.
Michael Green was the father-in-law of 2 West Point grads and my grandfather, and the grandfather of a third. He is also the father of the lone Naval Academy grad in our family ranks. Go Navy.
Colonel Edgar B. Colliday, class of 1942. Placing Colonel Colliday's ring into the crucible is Miss Christine Colliday.
My father, Edgar B. Jack Colliday, was a true patriot, a member of the greatest generation, class of 1942, and served our country in World War II and Korea. He often told me his years at West Point were some of the happiest of his life. I know he would be so honored to be a part of the next class of West Point graduates.
Colonel Donald E. Fowler, class of 1945. Placing Colonel Fowler's ring into the crucible is Donald Fowler II, class of 1971, and Christopher Fowler, class of 1981.
Our family is proud to share his legacy with Class of 2025 and future classes. Thank you.
Colonel William R. Guthrie, class of 1945. Placing Colonel Guthrie's ring into the crucible is Cadet Jack Peterson. Colonel Guthrie's family shared the following remarks. Colonel Bob Guthrie was very proud of his commission from West Point and thankful for the foundation it provided for his 30-year career as an infantryman on active duty and his continued service to his community and our country after retirement from the Army. His 3 sons and 1 daughter, including a graduate of your 50-year affiliate class of 1975, is thankful for the opportunity to honor their father's legacy through the contribution of his class ring to the ring melt. Mr. Dwight A. Riley, Jr., class of 1945. Placing Mr. Riley's ring into the crucible is Pat Ortland, class of 1982. Mr. Riley's family shared the following remarks. Dwight A. Riley was Honor Man of the Corps in 1947. After graduating, Dwight went on to help the military in the design and logistics for many projects. Though his work remains a secret, his love for his country knew no bounds. I will be followed by the Vice President of our class, Cadet Nathan Norris.
Colonel James H. Inskeep, class of 1946. Placing Colonel Inskeep's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant Colonel retired Chuck Salewski, class of 1996. Colonel Theodore J. Lepsky, class of 1946. Placing Colonel Lepsky's ring into the crucible is Aline Hicks and Lori Stahl.
It is with great honor that we pass on our father's torch of the long gray line. Please carry forward the mission of duty, honor, and country. Thank you very much.
Lieutenant Colonel Malcolm E. McDonald, class of 1946. Placing Colonel McDonald's ring into the crucible is Cadet Amiri Bruce. Colonel Joseph P. Pepe, class of 1946. Placing Colonel Pepe's ring into the crucible is Cadet Hongbo Jia. Colonel Pepe's family shared the following remarks. Being a cadet at the United States Military Academy was a dream come true for him. He was proud of his service to our country. Major General John C. Faith, class of 1947. Placing General Faith's ring into the crucible is Brigadier General Shane Reeves, class of 1996. This is the first of 2 rings generously donated by the Young Faith family. Brigadier General Tom J. Perkins, class of 1947. Placing General Perkins' ring into the crucible is Scott Perkins, who has donated 2 family rings to this year's melt. Mr. George Martin Edwards, Jr., class of 1948. Placing Mr. Edwards' ring into the crucible is Lieutenant General Stephen Gilland, class of 1990. Colonel Lewis M. Jameson, class of 1949. Placing Colonel Jameson's ring into the crucible is Terrence Sinkfield, class of 1999. This is the second ring donated by the Jameson family to this ring melt. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens W. Nunnally, class of 1949. Placing Colonel Nunnally's ring into the crucible are Joan Nunnally, John Nunnally, and Janine Jordan.
My dad wore his class of 49 ring with pride every day. And the only request he had of us before he died was that we donate it back to West Point to be included in the ring melt for future generations. And we are proud to fulfill his request today. Thank you.
Colonel Frank Borman, class of 1950. Placing Colonel Borman's ring into the crucible is Command Sergeant Major Robert T. Craven by special request of Colonel Borman.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Borman family, specifically Ed Borman, class of 1975, I am humbled and honored to place into that crucible the ring of Frank Borman, class of 1950. Be thou at peace, sir.
First Lieutenant Thomas P. Green, class of 1950. Placing Lieutenant Green's ring into the crucible on behalf of the Green family is Major Lawrence Green.
My great uncle, Lieutenant Thomas Patrick Green, youngest of 5 brothers who were Army officers, was killed in action in Korea while leading his infantry platoon in combat. He had graduated only 8 months earlier. Thank you.
Colonel Richard G. Hoffman, class of 1950. Placing Colonel Hoffman's ring into the crucible is Cadet Nicholas Flood. Colonel Hoffman's family shared the following remarks. Richard Hoffman, along with his brother, class of 1948, his father, class of 1919, and his great-grandfather, class of 1871, all part of West Point's long gray line. The gold from the Richards family ring will now be melted into gold that includes his brother's ring in a ceremony that will carry on this family's devotion to the long gray line. Colonel David S. Meredith, class of 1950. Placing Colonel Meredith's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant General Stephen Gilland, class of 1990. Colonel Meredith's family shared the following remarks. May the good karma in this ring follow you all the days of your service. I will be followed by our class treasurer, Cadet Hongbo Jia.
Mr. James A. Keeley, class of 1951. Placing Mr. Keeley's ring into the crucible are Mrs. Angie D. Keeley and Ms. Caitlin Keeley. This is the second ring generously donated by the Keeley family for this ring melt. Lieutenant Colonel Robert W. Milburn, class of 1951. Placing Colonel Milburn's ring into the crucible is Mary Milburn Hunt and Robert L. Milburn.
Our parents made 2 requests prior to their passing. The first, that we lay them both to rest at a place they loved so much, the place where they began their lives together. On graduation day, also their marriage day, June 5th, 1951, at West Point. We fulfilled this request this past June, 2023. Our parents now rest together in the columbarium wall at the West Point Cemetery. The final request was made by our father, who asked us to make sure that his ring was given back to West Point so that once melted, it would become part of the past, present, and future of the long gray line he so dearly loved.
Lieutenant Colonel Thomas H. Williams, class of 1951. Placing Colonel Williams' ring into the crucible is Jane C. Williams and Colonel Nam Park.
West Point was the crucible that formed my father's values that he lived with for his entire life.
Colonel Robert S. Holmes, class of 1952. Placing Colonel Holmes' ring into the crucible is Eric Holmes. Colonel Herbert D. Vogel, class of 1952. Placing Colonel Vogel's ring into the crucible is Cadet Woodson Squire. Lieutenant Samuel H. Fisher, Jr., class of 1953. Placing Colonel Fisher's ring into the crucible is Cadet Macy Marinick. Colonel Harry W. Emmerich, class of 1954. Placing Colonel Emmerich's ring into the crucible is Cadet Sion Kim. Dr. Robert E. Fromm, class of 1954. Placing Dr. Fromm's ring into the crucible is the Fromm family. Mr. Paul R. Jenkins Jr., class of 1954. Placing Mr. Jenkins' ring into the crucible are Mark and Terry Jenkins.
Our father would be so proud that his ring is participating in the traditions of the Long Gray Line. He lived his life adhering to the values he learned here: duty, honor, and country.
Colonel Jack R. Logan, class of 1954. Placing Colonel Logan's ring into the crucible is First Lieutenant Gavin Paulin, class of 2021. Mr. Andrew J. Maloney Jr., class of 1954. Placing Mr. Maloney's ring into the crucible is Mr. Andrew J. Maloney III.
Duty, honor, country, it's not just a campus slogan. For my father, it was a way of life. Duty to his family, honor to his God, and service to his country, as he did as an airborne ranger and a federal prosecutor, eventually being appointed U.S. attorney by President Reagan and then President Bush, where he prosecuted the New York Mafia, Colombian narco-terrorists, and political corruption, among many others. Leadership skills and a moral code that he learned here at West Point. In his final days, he was very happy to learn that West Point had a place for him at the cemetery for him and my mother, where he's buried now. And I thank West Point for all the assistance they gave my family during that process. And today's ring melt and his resting place just up the block from here bring things full circle for him and my family. And he will forever be cemented in the Long Gray Line.
Colonel Edwin E. Passmore, class of 1954. Placing Colonel Passmore's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant General Mark Herling. Colonel Passmore's family shared the following remarks. Edwin was a true hero who served for 30 years, 2 combat tours in Vietnam, and received the Soldier's Medal from his men. He was a wonderful man and served his town in many capacities for many years after he retired, and loved going to the Army-Navy games and football games at West Point. I'll be followed by our class historian, Cadet Macy Marinick.
Mr. Kenneth L. Donaldson, class of 1955. Placing Mr. Donaldson's ring into the crucible is Cadet Austin Lee. Mr. Donaldson's family shared the following remarks. He passed away on June 4th, 2023 from Alzheimer's, but refused to take off his ring until the end. Donated by his sons Kenneth S. Donaldson and Kevin Donaldson. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Joseph Fralin, class of 1955. Placing Colonel Fralin's ring into the crucible are David and Michael Fralin.
Today, my family is privileged to present this ring, symbolizing my father's enduring legacy within the Long Gray Line.
Lieutenant Colonel James E. C., class of 1955. Placing Colonel C's ring into the crucible is Cadet Keely Davis. His family shared the following remarks: "Go Army, beat Navy." Colonel Dennis L. Butler, class of 1956. Placing Colonel Butler's ring into the crucible are Brenda Thompson and Beth Islick.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say go Army.
Mr. Robert D. Randall, class of 1956. Placing Mr. Randall's ring into the crucible is Cadet Kevin O'Hara. Mr. Thomas W. Keeley, class of 1957. Placing Mr. Keeley's ring into the crucible are his son, Richard Wright Keeley, and his grandson, Colin Keeley. Colonel William B. Seeley, class of 1957. Placing Colonel Seeley's ring into the crucible are William B. Seeley Jr. and Karis Leos. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel P. Charlton, class of 1958. Placing Colonel Charlton's ring into the crucible is William Charlton.
My dad died as he lived, with integrity and humor. He loved his time at West Point. Two of his last wishes were to rest in the cemetery and to donate his ring to the ring mill. So it's an honor to be here fulfilling his wishes, and it's an honor to be here with you, the future of honor. Thank you.
Colonel Charles H. Davis IV, class of 1958. Placing Colonel Davis's ring into the crucible is Cadet Nathan Norris. Colonel Davis's family shared the following remarks: Chuck Davis was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, a base commander at Williams Air Force Base, Arizona, and was the first civilian dean of the faculty at the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama. Colonel David G. Kotz, class of 1959. Placing Colonel Kotz's ring into the crucible is Chris Kotz. Colonel Robert W. DeMont, class of 1959. Placing Colonel DeMont's ring into the crucible is Bob DeMont, class of 1984, and Cadet Robbie DeMont, class of 2025. The DeMont family has 8 West Point graduates across 6 generations.
Unfortunately, my father wasn't able to attend today because of illness, but he asked me to pass on a few words. Having served this country for 28 years, it is with great pride, but also great humility, that I offer my class ring to the ring melt for my grandson's class, Robbie DeMont's class of 2025, and future classes. The ring symbolizes to me the standards and traditions of the Long Gray Line and all that West Point represents. The values learned here will guide our lives forever. Personally, it also represents 8 family members across 6 generations of West Pointers in our family, 2 of which now have gold from their rings, infusing the spirit of the past and those values we carry with us into the future new leaders of our armed forces and our country.
Colonel Alfred B. Devereaux Jr., class of 1959. Placing Colonel Devereaux's ring into the crucible is James Conable. Mr. Thomas R. Soley, class of 1959. Placing Mr. Soley's ring into the crucible is Scott Perkins. This is the second ring that Mr. Perkins has donated generously to this ring melt.
My father, Tom Perkins, class of 47, and my father-in-law, Tom Soley, class of 59, both loved West Point. The Army values, the West Point traditions, and the lifelong bonds of friendship that they found here. They were proud West Point graduates who wore their rings from the day they got them to their last day. Our families would like to thank the association for supporting this outstanding program, one which gives proof to the loyalty and camaraderie that is the Long Gray Line. Thank you.
I will be followed by our Class Information Support Officer, Cadet Austin Lee.
Lieutenant Colonel Frederick A. Johnson, class of 1960. Placing Colonel Johnson's ring into the crucible are Mitch Johnson, Barbara Johnson, and Suzanne Gleason Renfro. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph B. Garrettson, Jr., class of 1961. Placing Colonel Garrettson's ring into the crucible are Ellis Kane and Ralph Garrettson. Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth H. Geiger, class of 1961. Placing Colonel Geiger's ring into the crucible is Roy Blakely, on behalf of his mother, Joanne Geiger. Colonel Emmanuel J. Scivoletto, class of 1961. Placing Colonel Scivoletto's ring into the crucible is Colonel Klepper, class of 1997. Colonel Thomas N. Sherburne, class of 1961. Placing Colonel Sherburn's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant Colonel George Matroka, class of 2000. Colonel Sherburn's family shared the following remarks. Tom Sherburne loved the military and served for 26 years, being posted in Asia and Central America, as well as in the United States, in Arizona, California, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. He was proud of his rise to colonel and is proud to give his ring to upcoming Army officers. Colonel Gerald A. Vick, class of 1961. Placing Colonel Vick's ring into the crucible are Marjorie Ashton, Elizabeth Bruno, and Augustus Ashton III.
It is an honor to be here today with my sister and husband to fulfill my father's request that his ring be included as part of the Long Gray Line. This ring symbolized his devoted commitment to West Point and our country, and hopefully it will symbolize to you our continued support and commitment to you as part of the Long Gray Line. Thank you.
Mr. Eugene M. McLemore Jr., class of 1964. Placing Mr. McLemore's ring into the crucible is Cadet Gwendolyn Hauser. Mr. Thomas C. Roberts, class of 1964. Placing Mr. Roberts' ring into the crucible are Tricia, Steve, and Scott Roberts, Thomas Roberts III, and Shonda Rogers.
duty, honor, country. The Roberts family prays for the U.S. Military Academy and the Long Gray Line as they continue to mold and develop young men and women comparable to Captain Thomas Craig Roberts, Jr., class of 1964.
Mr. William R. Vineyard. Placing Mr. Vineyard's ring into the crucible is Cadet Catherine LaRue. Mr. Stephen C. Dara, class of 1965. Placing Mr. Dara's ring into the crucible are Clark and Greg Dara.
So my father would have been disappointed in us if we didn't make any remarks. So it is our distinct honor to complete our father's final mission of returning his ring to West Point. The ring represents his lifetime commitment to this country and the academy, and we are grateful that his legacy will be able to live on with all future graduates in the Long Gray Line. Thank you.
Colonel Donald E. Nowland, class of 1965. Placing Colonel Nowland's ring into the crucible are Casey Butt.
Colonel Don Nolan, class of 65, mentor to our daughter Cody Butt, class of 23, as he was to so many other young people. When he passed, his widow Davita gave his ring to Cody to support her journey here at West Point. Cody and Davita Nowland couldn't be here, but are proud to dedicate this ring in Don's honor to be part of the future Long Gray line of rings. Thank you.
Captain David R. Crocker, Jr., class of 1966. Placing Captain Crocker's ring into the crucible is his wife, Mrs. Ruth W. Crocker.
On behalf of myself and the Crocker family, I want to say thank you for this opportunity. The stone in Dave's ring was lost in Vietnam, but I'm glad that the ring itself has found its home.
Colonel Henry R. Farrell, class of 1966. Placing Colonel Farrell's ring into the crucible are Susan Farrell and Thorsten Farrell.
Our children and I are honored and so proud to be here to put Rance's rings in the crucible. And we're doing exactly what he would have wanted us to do. Thank you.
I will be followed by our ring and crest chairperson, Cadet Keely Davis.
Lieutenant Colonel John David Hart, class of 1967. Placing Colonel Hart's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant Colonel retired Fareed Lowry, class of 1967.
John Hart and I were roommates in company D2 for plebe and yearling year, and we shared an awful lot of last sections together. We even alternated a couple times being in an ejection seat. I love John like a brother. I want to thank his widow, Jen, who couldn't be here today, for extending me the great honor of placing his ring. Thank you, Jen.
Lieutenant Colonel William T. McMahon, class of 1967. Placing Colonel McMahon's ring into the crucible is Cadet J.P. Cady. Colonel McMahon's family sent the following remarks. Integrity, honesty, faith, and commitment to excellence were hallmarks of Terry's life. His high school yearbook said about him, "When the greatest scorer of them all comes to mark against your name, he'll mark not against you won or lost, but how you played the game." Well done, Terry. Lieutenant Colonel Forrest D. Williams, class of 1967. Placing Colonel Williams' ring into the crucible are Debbie Williams, Laura Matos, Jake Williams, and Yvonne Rice.
My husband, Doug, always wanted to return his ring to West Point to perpetuate the long gray line. And as you've heard so many times today, he greatly valued the values that were forged here that became the guiding principles for his life and continues for our family. Go, class of 2025.
Mr. Stephen F. Davis, class of 1969. Placing Mr. Davis's ring into the crucible is the Davis family.
Our father used to say that West Point was the hardest place to go to, but the greatest place to be from. And today, we proudly fulfill that promise. Thank you.
Colonel James Etchecherry, class of 1970. Placing Colonel Etchecherry's ring into the crucible are Linda, James, and Christopher Etchecherry. Mr. Scott, excuse me.
Dad was a man of few words. He would not have wanted himself to be recognized, but one of his last wishes was that we return the ring to West Point. He is a man who exemplified duty, honor, country. He would not want to be recognized himself. He would want his son, Jim, also a grad, and nephews Tom and Joey Etchecherry, and his brother-in-arms. Serve with integrity, 70. Thank you.
Mr. Scott A. Crandall, class of 1971. Placing Mr. Crandall's ring into the crucible is Cadet Caleb Peterson. Mr. Clark A. Reynolds, class of 1974. Placing Mr. Reynolds' ring into the crucible is Major Charles Phelps, class of 2012. Major Edward M. Dannemiller II, class of 1975. Major Dannemiller is placing his ring into the crucible.
From my 71 bugle notes. These are the traditions held sacred by every West Pointer. Cherish them and pass them on to those who will follow after you. On behalf of my uncle William, class of 31, and my father Danny, class of 39, I am reminded that serving has been the greatest privilege of our lives. Thank you.
Brigadier General Robert W. Enzenauer, class of 1975. General Enzenauer is placing his ring into the crucible. Mr. Malcolm O. Everett, class of 1975. Placing Mr. Everett's ring into the crucible is Miss Joy G. Everett and Captain Hunter Clay, class of 2014.
My uncle loved this academy. On the behalf of his widow, Joy, and the entire Everett family, we are humbled and honored to submit his legacy to the Long Gray Line forever. Thank you.
Major Carl R. Johnson, class of 1975. Placing Major Johnson's ring into the crucible are Sandra Johnson, Jane Lamb, Faye Peebles, and Angela Muller. Mr. Craig D. Young, class of 1975. Placing Mr. Young's ring into the crucible is Cadet Ethan Trampush. Mr. Young sends the following remarks. Together we thrive, courage and drive. I will be followed by our Ring and Crest Deputy Chairperson, Cadet Sion Kim.
Colonel Thomas K. Littlefield, Jr., class of 1975. Colonel Littlefield is placing his ring into the crucible.
Class of 2025, you are the future. May the Long Gray Line run forever. Duty, country, honor always, and beat the hell out of Navy.
Major Danny E. Stroud, class of 1975. Placing Major Stroud's ring into the crucible is Lieutenant Colonel Mick Hauser, class of 1984. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce C. Tyson, class of 1975. Placing Colonel Tyson's ring into the crucible is Cadet Madeline Suh. Colonel Tyson shared the following remarks. Please accept my contribution to my affiliate West Point class of 2025. Sorry I can't be there to personally wish you the best of success. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Zock, class of 1975. Placing Colonel Zock's ring into the crucible is Cadet Jade Wyatt. Mr. David N. Shelley, class of 1980. Placing Mr. Shelley's ring into the crucible is Cadet Elizabeth Oberhaus. Mr. Shelley's family shared the following remarks. David was always proud to be in the first class that admitted women. He and I would be very pleased if his ring was part of a female cadet's ring. Mr. Michael C. Wilmer, class of 1982. Placing Mr. Wilmer's ring into the crucible is Mark Easton, class of 1982.
Michael Wilmer had a superpower. He could dance. His family and his classmates wish the same for the class of 2025. We love you, Mikey.
Mr. John L. Elliott, class of 1983. Placing Mr. Elliott's ring into the crucible is Kathy Kilner, class of 1990. Anonymous, class of 1984. Placing the ring into the crucible is Captain Micah Wolf, class of 2013. Mrs. Diane Berman Brune, class of 1984. Placing Mrs. Brune's ring into the crucible is her husband, Mark Brune. Anonymous, class of 1991. Placing the ring into the crucible is Colonel Mark Beeger, class of 1991. Colonel Mason Crow, class of 1993. Placing Colonel Crow's ring into the crucible is Stephanie Erickson, class of 1993.
This is the first ring donated by a member of the class of 1993 to become part of the Legacy Gold. Mason wanted his ring to be included in his daughter's ring. Defenders of the Free, 93.
First Lieutenant Jacob N. Fritz, class of 2005. Placing Lieutenant Fritz's ring into the crucible is Nola Fritz, Major Dan Fritz, Captain Ethan Fritz, and Major Andrew Kim.
Never did he dream, as a farm kid from Nebraska, that he would go to West Point. He planned that from 5th grade on. He wanted to go and become a leader of men. He served in Karbala, where he was abducted and executed as a POW. And I am so proud of him and his brothers. And I want the cadets of the class of 2025 to know how much strength and courage you will carry with them, and that I hope it inspires you to become better men, better leaders, and better soldiers. Well done, be thou at peace.
Colonel William B. Craig, class of 1945. Placing Colonel Craig's ring into the crucible is Father Matt Palagowski, class of 1986. I will be followed by the Director of Class Services for the West Point Association of Graduates, Debbie Edelin.
Cadet LaRue is holding a vial of gold shavings known as the Legacy Gold, which contains trace elements of gold from class rings donated over the last 23 years. These rings were worn by graduates who served in all branches of service spanning the classes of 1896 to 2006. The graduates served our nation bravely in armed conflicts from the Philippines, the Mexican expedition of 1916, both world wars, Korea, the Dominican Republic, Vietnam, Panama, the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And the oldest ring that is part of the Legacy Gold belonged to Colonel Percy Myers Kessler, class of 1896, who fought in the Philippines insurrection and whose son and grandson also graduated from the academy. Gold from one of the newest rings belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jerome McMahon, class of 1985, who died in a plane crash in Bamiyan, Afghanistan on November 27th, 2004. With us today is his wife, Colonel Jeanette McMahon, class of 1983, and their son, Cadet Dennis Richard McMahon IV, class of 2025. Colonel McMahon's ring was donated to the Cadet Library Ring Display in 2014. A small chip of gold has been carefully removed, and Cadet McMahon is adding it to the Legacy Gold. Ever since the United States Military Academy was established in 1802, its graduates have been tested in the crucible of combat and have proven themselves to be leaders of character for our nation. West Point graduates have lived, and many have made the ultimate sacrifice for our cherished values of duty, honor, country. The Legacy Gold will be added to the 88 newly donated class rings that are already in the crucible and subjected to intense heat. Then gold from 895 graduates' rings will meld together to be forged into the West Point rings for the class of 2025. Through the West Point Class Ring Memorial Program, each new class ring is imbued with the strength, wisdom, and principles of the core of an earlier day. May the service and patriotic sacrifice of the graduates whose rings have been donated remain physically and symbolically with the class of 2025 as they proudly wear their class rings. Cadet Kathleen LaRue, class president of the class of 2025, will now say a few words.
General and Mrs. Gilland, Sergeant Major Barretto, General Robinson, Sergeant Major Craven, General Reeves, General Hertling, my fellow classmates from the class of 2025, and most especially our ring donors and ring donor families. Thank you for joining us today for this special ring melt event. I wish that I could shake the hand of Lieutenant Colonel Ron Turner, class of 1958, who came up with the incredible idea of melting down graduates' donated rings to incorporate the gold into the rings of new firstie classes at West Point. Because of his idea and efforts by the Association of Graduates since, my classmates and I will look down at our rings next August with incredible pride, for the obvious reason of our excitement about soon emerging as graduates of West Point, hopefully. but now also for a much deeper reason. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Turner's great idea, we will look down at our rings and recognize that its gold contains the same gold that was worn by astronauts, Medal of Honor recipients, prisoners of war, 4-star generals, and several brave soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice while serving this nation, all graduates of this academy. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Turner's idea, we will look at our ring and be reminded of our connection to our affiliate class, the class of 1975, whose graduates have been cheering on and supporting our class since our day, and the 9 whose rings have been donated today and will be with our class throughout our service. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Turner's idea, my classmate Ricky McMahon will look down at his ring and feel ever connected to his brave father who paid the ultimate price in service to our country. Robbie DeMont, whose grandfather's ring was donated today, will look at his ring and be reminded of his own family's 6 generations of service within the Army as West Point graduates, the earliest of which graduated in 1838. Several of my classmates will feel similar connections. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Turner's idea, my classmates and I will feel connected to and inspired by the 88 graduates whose rings were specifically donated for our ring melt. A class ring from the United States Military Academy already means so much. Class rings were literally invented by West Point. But now, with the gold of our rings containing the gold worn by 895 graduates before us, our rings will mean so much more. Thank you to all of you who generously donated your own or your family member's ring today. The class of 2025 is grateful and proud to be forever connected to you.
Thank you, Cadet LaRue, and the class of 2025 participants for honoring the graduates whose rings will forever be linked with yours. Cadet Davis, please post to retrieve the crucible for melting of the gold in Crest Hall. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our ceremony. Thank you for your attendance today, both in person and on our live stream. We once again want to express our sincere gratitude to all of our ring donors. Thank you. So for everyone in the theater, our live stream should be over. I have some announcements. We will be taking 2 photos. The first photo will be here in the theater for all attendees. The second one will be on the steps of Crest Hall for 1 representative per ring family, all the ring presenters, the West Point and the Association of Graduates leader teams, the class of 1966 representatives, and the class of 2025 class officers. For the first photo, please remain where you are for the photo to be taken by our photographer who will be here on the stage. If you're seated in the center section, simply stand. For those who are seated on the sides, please move into the aisles. And the class officers, please take your place in front of the leader team for this photo. So everyone, if you would please rise.